Hello, my name is Stephanie Panton, and today I am going to be presenting a PowerPoint presentation on a current event, and I have chosen youth homelessness. Let's get into it. Hidden in plain sight, bringing compassion and action to homeless youth. The invisible crisis, a growing reality, on the rise, school struggles. Welcome, everyone. Today, we are talking about a crisis that often hides in plain sight, youth homelessness. Right now, over 1.5 million students are struggling without a stable place to call home, which is a 12.6% increase in youth housing instability in recent years. And because of this, unhoused students miss significantly more school days due to survival needs. This is not just a statistic. These are kids trying to learn while wondering where they will sleep tonight. It is an educational crisis and a human crisis, and the numbers are only going up. Living in this country, no child should go without a home, should go hungry, and should go with any sort of lack of education. Defining the problem, hidden and safe, high vulnerability, the housing gap. The heart of the problem is that youth homelessness looks different than adult homelessness. Young people often find themselves couch surfing or moving from place to place to avoid the foster system or the stigma of being on the streets. I would say, especially in the foster care system, because you already have vulnerable youth being taken away from one bad situation and put into another situation where they're now experiencing what they got taken away for in the first place. It could be things such as sexual abuse, physical abuse, neglect. And for them, they feel that now that they're back in that same situation, that sadly, it's going to be better on the streets when it's just not. If anything, it's way more dangerous. Because they are hidden and without family support, they are incredibly vulnerable to exploitation and trauma. And the exploitation and trauma that comes to mind would be sex trafficking. Also, due to the housing gap, this leads to a major lack of safe, affordable housing spaces designed specifically for young adults. Our advocacy has to focus on finding them and creating safe spaces that fit their unique needs. Who is affected? Disproportionate risks, school as a safe haven, systemic blocks. When we look at who is affected, we see a massive inequality. For example, LGBTQ youth are over twice as likely to end up unhoused, often due to family rejection. And once they are on the streets, they face additional struggles because of stigma and discrimination. So you have a kid whose mom and dad kick them out because they may be gay or they may identify as a different gender. Well, kicking them out of the house just puts them in more danger because they're going to be facing the exact same issues, but just outside of the home now. Young people of color also experience higher rates of homelessness because of systemic and structural racism. Right now, our systems are fragmented. A school must recognize a kid as homeless, but a housing program might not. Our job as advocates is to bridge these gaps so no young person gets left behind. The McKinney-Vento Act is a federal law signed by Ronald Reagan on July 22nd, 1987, that helps keep kids in their schools, offering stability and provides transportation when needed. When it comes to the transportation part, it could be for two different scenarios. It could be kids living in rural areas where there's just no transportation whatsoever, and they have to maybe walk miles and miles to get to school, or you have kids that live in low income housing areas where there's no school buses whatsoever, so they have to rely on public transportation, the public bus to get to school, which costs money. The McKinney-Vento Act is just a great act in general. Advocacy requires us to align disconnected federal definitions of homelessness so that vulnerable adolescents do not slip through the cracks of available aid. Micro level, healing the individual. Behind the trauma, mental health toll, the social work role. At the micro level, we see the individual face of this crisis. Most unhoused youth are escaping trauma, violence, neglect, or family rejection. 85% of unhoused youth report past domestic or physical violence, and 50% face severe anxiety, depression, and PTSD. As social workers, our micro-level advocacy starts with trauma-informed care. We provide mental health support and build individual resilience. We are not just finding a bed, we are healing the psychological scars that housing instability leaves on a developing mind. We can also provide immediate crisis interventions such as high-risk substance overdose reversal and post-venting stabilization, conflict mediation to prevent immediate shelter discharge, and de-escalating identity-based family rejection. Out of those three examples, the high-risk substance abuse overdose reversal, that could be a youth on the streets that overdose, we'll just say on fentanyl, and you have clinical technicians come in that can administer things such as Narcan. Another example out of those three is the conflict mediation to prevent immediate shelter discharge. That could be two juveniles arguing. They're already mad and upset that they have to be in a shelter, and one threatens to harm himself or the other person. And instead of just automatically kicking that youth child out, you can separate them and de-escalate the situation. Meso-level, building community safety nets, local solutions, community creativity, teamwork. Moving at the meso-level, we look at the neighborhoods and social networks. Successful communities are experimenting with repurposing vacant buildings into dedicated youth housing. This intervention transforms neighborhood decline into a vital resource. By strengthening local networks, including libraries, clinics, and community-based organizations, we create a community-wide safety net that catches youth before they become chronically homeless adults on the streets. Now, I don't want people to look at this as gentrifying an area. If anything, it's opposite. There's actual a positive purpose behind this. So you take one dilapidated building, restructure it, and now it becomes a youth center or a youth housing center for homeless youth or youth that are looking or youth that are about to become homeless. Macro level, changing the system, fighting for funding, policy reform, a human right. At the macro level, we have to look at the big picture, which is policy and laws. Right now, advocates are fighting hard to protect federal funding for youth shelters and outreach programs. We need to lobby for laws that fix the system and make it easier for young people to get government aid. True advocacy means standing up to lawmakers and reminding them that housing is a fundamental human right. Current efforts focus on fighting funding cuts to the Runaway and Homeless Youth Act, which has been leading social policy for homeless youth in the United States since 1974. This act provides federal funding for shelter, housing, and counseling to youth experiencing homelessness. At this level, we lobby for legislative changes such as the Homeless Children and Youth Act to streamline federal definitions and unlock restricted resources which can help to prevent and end homelessness. True advocacy means standing up to lawmakers and reminding them that housing is a fundamental human right, which everybody should have the right to be sheltered, especially the youth, the most vulnerable ones. Understanding the root causes, connecting the pieces, overlapping barriers, a shared responsibility. To truly understand this crisis, we have to look at how everything connects. A young person's individual trauma is made worse when a community lacks resources, and it is solidified when federal policies fail them. Homelessness is not a personal failure, it is a systemic failure. When we understand how identity, race, and poverty overlap, we can create advocacy that actually fixes the root causes of the problem. We can also achieve this by applying the socio-ecological framework and intersectionality theory, allowing us to see how an individual's personal trauma is worsened by the lack of resources, which is 100% true. Because if you already have a young, impressionable child that's already dealt with trauma, probably from the beginning of life, and now they're going to be possibly homeless, having a lack of resources just diminishes that even worse. It makes the person think to myself, what is even the point of living if there's no resources for this trauma that I'm dealing with. Nobody wants to help. I have nowhere to turn, and there's zero resources for me. So what should I do as an 11-year-old? Practicing social justice, fair and just care, safe spaces, reaching everyone. Social justice means realizing that a universal approach does not work. An LGBTQ plus teenager needs a shelter space where they will not face harassment, and a youth living in a rural area needs access to resources that usually only exist in big cities. Practicing true justice means always looking at our programs and asking, who are we leaving out and how do we bring them in? Education and health disparities have a huge impact on the homeless youth population. And an example of this are low graduation rates, chronic toxic stress, and poor metabolic health. By pursuing social justice, we can fight for equitable resource distribution, ensuring that the homeless population, such as LGBTQ plus youth and youth living in rural areas, receive adequate funding so no one is left behind. An example of this would be the low graduation rates. The instability of homelessness forces these youth into a constant state of transition, which then directly fractures their academic progress. So if you are a kid who's been kicked out of your home, or is in foster care, and you've jumped from house to house to house, school to school to school, you could end up being 15 years old and still in eighth grade. You just get so far behind that a lot of the students just think, okay, well, I have nothing else going for me. I'm so far behind in school, I might as well just drop out. These are things that are not okay. Guided by faith and values, inherent value, our shared calling, leading with hope. When we look at this through the lens of faith and deep personal values, advocacy becomes a calling. Every single one of these young people has inherent dignity and worth, no matter their current situation, and a social worker must aim to enhance every individual's capacity and opportunity to change and address their own needs. Now, I'm not saying you have to get holier than thou, Jesus, 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 because the majority of these kids are in darkness. They don't see the light that faith and having values can bring. So that's the last thing that they want to hear. Social workers are called to be caretakers of justice and to stand up for those who have been marginalized. This compassion is what fuels our passion to change these broken systems and to offer real hope. And once you can bring a child out of darkness and see that there is hope and that they are valued, there's nothing like it. Moving forward, our next steps: unify the system, invest in schools, lead with compassion. In conclusion, our call to action is clear. We must aggressively lobby for the passage of the Homeless Children and Youth Act to unlock federal aid. That's just bottom line. Nationally, we need to demand a 20% increase in school-based advocacy funding. But policy cannot heal trauma. It requires a structural shift in how we meet these youth at their lowest points. By integrating immediate trauma-informed crisis intervention, we can directly combat the staggering education and health disparities that keep youth marginalized. We cannot expect an unhoused youth to pass a test or manage a chronic illness when they are stuck in an endless survival loop. Most importantly, we must ensure that every single point of contact for an unhoused youth is a place of absolute safety, dignity, and professional competence. Thank you so much for joining me today as we discuss the youth homeless problem in the beautiful country of the United States of America. And again, it's something that is hidden in plain sight. And it's our job as social workers to advocate, be compassionate, and listen to what our youth are telling us and find better solutions to combat this huge ongoing problem. I hope you all have a great rest of your day. Thank you.